Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today we're going to be discussing Terabox. I believe this is the new best deck in the post-rotation format. So today I'm going to go over the basics of the archetype, discuss the most important inclusions, and also talk about the wiggle room that this deck has to adapt to the changing metagame. So what is Terabox? Well, Terabox was created by the biggest and best mind in the Pokemon trading card game. No, not the guy on the left, the guy on the right, Tord Reklev, the best player of all time, and possibly the best deck builder of all time as well. We've seen throughout the years that he can produce the best deck lists in any format, and this season Tord actually made the trip over to Japan to participate in a 5,000 player Champions League, and he got top 16 with this new innovative deck list. Before we get into the basics, I did just want to quickly cover why this archetype is just starting to spring up now, because the majority of the cards aren't new in this set. It of course uses the Noctowl engine, which is already in format, and all the Terrestrial attackers were already in format as well. So what's actually changed in the metagame to make this the new best deck in format? Firstly, Manaphy rotates, immediately turning Wellspring Ogerpon into the most dangerous attacking threat in the game, where there is very little counterplay to a Wellspring taking multiple prize knockouts on evolving archetypes. Secondly, the Lily's Clefairy EX inclusion is massive from Journey Together. This gives us easy opportunities to one-hit KO Dragapult EX, and that was something lacking with the toolbox of attackers that we had pre-Journey Together. And then just a final note on the sort of landscape shift of the format, it's that many turbo decks are now rotating, which actually gives us a license to put down lots of two-prize Pokemon onto our bench on the first turn of the game to set us up for Noctowl on turn 2. Even if we get hand disrupted, we can already pre-bench that Terra. Whereas in the previous format, because there were aggressive archetypes in the format, we would have to try and go for a single prize board state, and then our hand could be disrupted, we could miss out on Terras and this, that, and the other, and things could get really awkward for us. So the fact that there aren't so many gusting, aggressive, big basic archetypes out there does actually give a bit of an internal buff to the Noctowl engine inherently, because we're more happy to put down these multi-prizes. That leads us quite nicely into the very basic concept of the Terabox then. Fan Rotom and Noctowl is a really low maintenance engine. You just need one ball search card to get that fan call going from your Rotom on the first turn of the game, and the Jewel Seeker is one of the most powerful abilities that we have, because rather than drawing cards and hoping to hit certain combinations, we are searching cards out of the deck here, any two trainer cards straight into the hand, and that's going to guarantee lines of play turn by turn. That's really important for a toolbox strategy where we can map out the best attacker on every single turn and actually guarantee that attacker, as long as we have access to those Jewel Seekers, we know what we have access to and what we don't during the turn. So we have a lot of control over what's going on every single turn of the game. That Jewel Seeker is a phenomenal ability, but it does require a Terra Pokemon to be in play, which naturally means the more Terras we have in our deck, the higher the consistency, because by turn 2 you need to have a Terra down. So inherently it makes sense for us to have a toolbox approach going on in the deck, because every extra Terra Pokemon you throw into the list actually improves your turn 2 consistency, even if you're not looking to attack with that specific Terra, because unlocking your Jewel Seekers then allows you to fix your entire turn 2. I also wanted to quickly touch on some more Terra support. The Area Zero Underdepths is, of course, an incredible stadium card. It allows us to expand our bench from the regular 5 all the way up to 8. Those additional bench slots can then be utilized for some additional Hoot Hoot to ensure we continue using Noctowl throughout the entire game, but additionally some fantastic basic EX abilities. The Latias EX's Skyliner ability gives our basic Pokemon freedom of retreat. Mew EX is naturally a free retreat Pokemon, has that restart ability to help us top up on cards, which is actually really important because you'll see momentarily that our crucial supporter is Crispin, which is not a draw supporter, so getting additional draw from our abilities is actually really essential, and that genome hacking attack also shouldn't be slept on. Yes, it's 3 energy, but when Crispin is a key supporter in the deck, and we already have Energy Switch, you actually can copy many attacks from opponents, so certainly keep this Pokemon in mind. And then that Pheasantipity EX, whenever you have board space for this Pokemon, it can be fantastic. Flip the script, sitting on board can really protect you against all sorts of archetypes to make sure that you're secure against hand disruption. And with a large bench like this, having both Mew and Pheasantipity EX, ideally we also have a Hoot Hoot down as well, gives us so much security in those late game stages that we are robust against hand disruption. And that's really good for an archetype like this, because don't be fooled, we're an aggressive deck. We're looking to sculpt 2 prize KOs any which way possible with our toolbox of attackers. Let's get on to those core attacking threats then, the sort of A-team of Pokemon that we have going on in the deck list. Starting off with some of the Terra Pokemon then, we are playing 2 Wellspring Mask Ogerpon EX. I think this is the most important one to mention at the beginning, Because that Torrential Pump is an incredible attack in this new metagame, when the only bench protection is from a Rabsca that your opponent would have to TM Evo into, there's a lot of board states where Torrential Pump simply runs away with the game. Its attack cost is 1 water, 2 colorless, which is really handy because we are playing lots of different types of energy within the deck list, so it has great synergy with Crispin, and it also means that we only need to play 1 water energy in the deck to have access to this attack. Bearing in mind, if we prize that water energy, we still have the Sparkling Crystal that could still count as that water energy. So even though you just play 1 count, the crystal is covering for your prizing as well. Torrential Pump is of course the main benefit here, but don't sleep on the Sob attack either, where we can trap the defending Pokemon, deny them from retreating, maybe if we're having a disruptive turn and we're trying to buy a little bit of time before we can amass a bigger combo, or if your opponent happens to be low on resources, you know how many switch cards they've burned, you still can find backdoor win conditions with this attack. Next up we have the Teal Mask Ogerpon EX. This is kind of a hybrid of an attacking threat and an enabler for the deck inherently, because of that Teal Dance ability, allowing us to attach extra energy throughout the turn onto these Teal Mask Ogerpon, and get additional draws here and there. That's helping again with consistency, again just naturally thinning the deck. That also enables Energy Switch to be another means of acceleration, so we're not fully tied to the Crispin supporter every turn, giving us that license to use Disruption supporters, possibly Boss's Orders as well on crucial turns. This Teal Dance is really important to make these attackers much more efficient. But don't forget that the Myriad Leaf Shower is still really relevant. It is a 3 grass energy attack cost, so we are mostly playing basic grass energy within this deck list. But that grass typing is still relevant coming into the post-rotation format. There is still, of course, Charizard EX roaming around, and there's also the new Ends Zoroark, which also has that grass weakness. So there are a lot of opportunities to use your Teal Mask Ogerpon in attacking situations as well. Pikachu EX is trying to be a bit of a catch-all Pokemon within the list. Topaz Bolt simply is massive damage output. A 300 vanilla baseline is huge, we don't have to care too much about type coverage in a lot of instances. We're even reaching on the bulky stage 1s like Archaladon. And we know that we already have type coverage for the most predominant stage 2s already, with Ogerpon and the next attacker I'll be mentioning, so the Topaz Bolt gets us through basically everything that isn't a stage 2. Its attack cost is a little bit awkward, but fortunately it does already have grass in there, so it can synergize nicely with Energy Switch combos alongside a Crispin to get a Topaz Bolt off. But at the same merit, in multi-prize matchups, Pikachu EX may well be your Sparkling Crystal holder over the Wellspring Ogerpon, which is typically better in the single prize evolving matchups. One thing to note is that we are only playing 1 Lightning, 1 Metal Energy in these deck lists, so keeping an eye on your Night Stretcher count is also important here if you want to reload that Topaz Bolt multiple times in a game. The other core benefit, of course, of Pikachu is that Resolute Heart ability, allowing us to tank a hit when we would otherwise be KO'd and instead go down to 10 hit points remaining. There are a handful of archetypes that don't have easy workarounds from this ability, so it can really help Pikachu often get a double dip with that Sparkling Crystal if you are opting to attach it to your Pikachu, because it can be a pesky Pokemon to remove from play. The new 4th horseman of this apocalypse then is the Lily's Clefairy EX. Its Fairy Zone ability turns Dragon Pokemon's weakness now to Psychic. That allows not only Clefairy, but also the Mew EX that we have in the deck list to be really potent attackers into these Dragon matchups, like Raging Bolt EX and Dragapult EX. Clefairy's Full Moon Rondo attack is definitely serviceable as well. For 1 Psychic, 1 Colorless, we deal 20 plus 20 more for each benched Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's. We're already playing Area 0 Underdepths in the deck list, so it's quite common that Clefairy can easily reach on basic EX Pokemon, so it comes up in all sorts of situations, not just being a Dragapult Slayer. And then finally, a quick nod to the Blood Moon Ursaluna EX. This is just a fantastic late-game finisher card. When we've spent a lot of our resources in terms of Crispining energy out of the deck, we've spent our Sparkling Crystal, we've used a number of our Energy Switch, Blood Moon Ursaluna, typically with Boss's Orders, is going to be an easy way for you to close out games on your opponent's benched liability basic EXs. Don't forget, however, you can also still Crispin and Energy Switch to this Pokemon, so if you want to get the Blood Moon into the mix earlier, you certainly can do that. We already have the Latias that can free retreat, and there's means of pivoting as well. So again, the Blood Moon really is just a generic high damage output option within the deck. I did quickly just want to reiterate that the energy upkeep is the most important and integral thing for the archetype, because all of our attackers have 2 and 3 energy attack costs, apart from that Blood Moon Ursaluna, which is typically going to attack for 1 or 0 in the later stages of the game. But Crispin really is that focal piece. You're able to get an energy to your hand and one immediately attached onto one of your Pokemon. Both this and the Sparkling Crystal can subvert the Budew item lock as well, which is really handy because even a Budew now can't protect a lot of these evolving archetypes from a turn 2 Wellspring Ogerpon. really helping us brute force through pretty much anything we need to with this burst acceleration. And like I said, that E-switch chips in here and there, giving us that license to use a supporter every now and then that isn't the Crispin, either for more draw power, or for disruption, or for gusting your opponent's multi-prizes. Now let's take a look at a skeleton list then. Don't be too intimidated by the huge array of low counts in the deck. We've already talked about the nature of this archetype. We are a toolbox. We're going to find different opportunities for all of these Pokemon. We're maximizing counts of the Noctowl engine. We have 2 copies of the Fan Rotom, and we're maximizing those counts of Nest Ball and Ultra Ball to get into the game. You'll also notice the transformative start Ditto in here. This is actually a pretty important card within the deck list. This is a basic Pokemon that we can search with Fan Rotom, and it can really fix a number of hands here. With Ball Search of a Latias EX, we can get this Ditto into the active pretty easily and transform into the best Terra for the right situation. Even in the worst case scenario, you can pay Retreat out or a number of these 1 retreat cost Pokemon within the deck, just to get that transformative start going. And in the worst case scenario, whenever you get the Ditto in the opening hand, this is an optimal lead, of course. The non-Crispin supporters are Boss's Orders, Professor's Research for a big dig into the deck, and Ino for some hand disruption, but also 1 Professor Churro scenario. Latias gives us free retreat on all of our basics, but the Noctowls still have a single retreat cost. We have a few ways around this. Of course, we can energy switch retreat if we've used Teal Dance. We can use Crispin as well in certain instances to get an extra attachment floated on Noctowl and then manually attach it elsewhere. But also the Professor Churro scenario is a great way to pick up trapped Noctowls, because we always want to have floating Hoot Hoots around our bench for future turns to continue our Jewel Seekers. At the same merit, the Churro scenario allows us to go earlier in with the Blood Moon Ursaluna more comfortably. We can use that Blood Moon attack, knowing that we still have Churro scenario in the deck that can combine nicely with the Skyliner ability of Latias. We can retreat our Blood Moon and then Churro up whatever we need to, going back into the Blood Moon to reset for that attack. The other items of note are the 2 copies of Night Stretcher. This is an all-rounder here. Of course, we play low counts of many of our energy cards, and of course, low counts of all of our predominant attackers. But one of the crucial elements of Night Stretcher is actually recovering Noctowls. Whenever our Area 0 Underdepths is bumped, you want to have those additional outs in the deck to continue to use those Jewel Seekers. So it's actually a pretty critical component. 9 energy is kind of the lowest I would possibly go in the list. You'll notice that there are 2 copies of Psychic rather than any of the other energy. That's because the Sparkling Crystal, as I mentioned earlier, can cover if you've prized Water and want to use Ogerpon, or if you've prized either Metal or Lightning, you can cover that on Pikachu and simply Crispin out your other 2 basic energy, which is the Grass plus the other one, to still get those attacks off. It's only the Psychic energy that you can't afford to prize, because Clefairy can't utilize the Sparkling Crystal tool, so it has to be a 2 count in the deck. There's also a tiny mention that you can also then attack with Latias EX technically in the deck. Eon Blade does a base 200 damage output. It's really not great, but just in case opponents are trying to trap, it is something to bear in mind. Now let's talk about filling those final few spaces, and there are a few other possible attackers that I'm definitely considering entering into my toolbox. Cornerstone Ogerpon EX is a wall breaker with its Demolish attack that gets through all effects on your opponent's Pokemon, and it's also a wall in its own right with the very frustrating Cornerstone Stance ability, preventing all damage from attacks by your opponent's Pokemon that have an ability. This could be a huge headache card for Golden Go variants, sometimes Archaludon variants. Zoroark can struggle with this as well. Cornerstone Ogerpon is a really important and powerful ability in the post-rotation format. So you can play 2 sides of the coin here. You can be annoying for opponents and get through your opponent's other annoying Pokemon. Whilst at the same time, you're just another Terra Pokemon. So in terms of your opening hand structure, just giving yourself more Terras in your deck gives you more outs to play the game because of how important Jewel Seeker is. The same can be said for Terapagos EX. It's another Terra that can simply help out with your engine. It's a really solid Cornerstone Ogerpon answer actually, because it obviously has no ability, and the Unified Beatdown can reach that 240 threshold. Speaking of that attack, it makes it another generically strong option, similar to Blood Moon, similar to that Lily's Clefairy as well. Unified Beatdown can often be a really good, efficient option for just 2 energy, which is definitely welcomed. And we actually have the energy attack cost for that Crown Opal attack as well. The Grass, Water, and Lightning is all within the deck, so if you really want to go for that attack, 180 is not the best damage output, but there can be opportunities to still take multi-prize KOs with this attack, preventing all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from basic non-colorless Pokemon. A pretty interesting one is actually Zarude here. Thanks to its grass typing, Jungle Whip can actually be an answer to both Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon EX and for Rigorath EX. Jungle Whip for 2 grass, 1 colorless does 80, and you may put all energy from this Pokemon into your hand to have it do 80 more damage. 160, as we know, is a good threshold. This could be a way for you to randomly uptrade into a Squawkabilly EX, and thanks to weakness, KO the new Zoroark EX as well. It's really important that there are 2 grass energy in this attack cost, making it really handy for energy switch plays with Teal Mask Ogerpon, so it's really not too much to ask for to get it going, even though it's a 3 energy attacker. Then there's trying to add your own stage 1 Farigiraf EX into your own deck list. That Armor Tail is such an annoying ability to get around, preventing all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's basic Pokemon EX. There are some archetypes that simply don't respect this card enough, and getting it into play is a win condition in its own right. We're already playing Psychic Energy in the deck, so the Dirty Beam is online here, dealing 160 and 30 to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. That 160 is certainly serviceable and can help you get through the basic non-EXs that your opponent can have as they try and put damage into this Pokemon. A reason why this is slightly more so a consideration within our deck list is because there is a colorless Girafarig, so in the matchups where we think this card is going to be useful, we can fan call out the Girafarig alongside our early game Hoot Hoot and Noctowl, and have a really easy means of establishing it on turn 2 of the game, where you simply ask the opponent, have you respected this card or not? Outside of the attacking options, there are some other includes that I'm considering. Even as one-ofs, these cards can all be really integral. Because of our Noctowl engine, we can always search these for the right time. Countercatcher, as we know, a phenomenal item card to gust up bench Pokemon when we're behind on prize cards. Again, because Crispin is so important for accelerating to our attackers, the Countercatcher is a great means of gust. Buddy Buddy Poffin is always going to be a decent card to open, of course, but this is also a fallback just in case you don't get your Fan Rotom, just to get 2 Hoot Hoot down in the sort of mid-game to try and get you back on your feet on future turns. Judge is an interesting supporter in the post-rotation meta, simply down to how many other archetypes utilize the Fan Rotom. Being able to deny your opponent some guaranteed Noctowl, even if you're taking a single prize KO with your Fan Rotom, could be a really devastating play in a number of matchups. And then, because this archetype is very light on those resources, I've also considered Energy Retrieval and Super Rod. Super Rod loading the energy back into the deck allows you to activate immediately with Crispin to get them accessed again, so is really helpful for reloading Pikachu specifically, that discards all of its energy. But as we know, a lot of those Noctowl can find their way into the discard pile, so Super Rodding some of them back into the mix can also improve your outs from Ino later on, although it does have that minor anti-synergy when you want Night Stretcher to be live for Noctowl, so you pretty much only ever rod back in one additional Noctowl, so that's less of a massive factor. And then Energy Retrieval's interesting as well, because this has synergy, of course, with Teal Mask Ogerpon to continue drawing a few cards here and there, and opens up those energy switches much more live in your hand, so both certainly have their merits. Let's look back to towards Fukuoka 60 then. I must stress this is a really high quality list. It got very far in a 5,000 player tournament. Compared to my skeleton list, there is an additional copy of Professor's Research, Area Zero Underdepths, a 3rd copy of Energy Switch as well, and a 5th copy of Grass Energy. I think 10 is definitely the sweet spot of basic energy cards. The only reason I have 4 in the skeleton is because there might be situations where we want other basic energy in here, for example with Cornerstone Ogerpon. And then the one-off additions for Tord was the Terapagos EX and that Countercatcher. Honestly, it's still hard to pull myself away from this exact 60. I think it's of a really, really high quality. There's a lot that is spot on here, and I wouldn't blame you for continuing to run this exact 60. However, as we know, walling archetypes are still very prevalent, so having a bit more respect for these archetypes might be worthwhile. This is my rendition of a wall-breaking list that's incorporated the Fighting Energy and the Cornerstone Ogerpon in addition to a Terapagos EX, so we have all sorts of answers through opposing Cornerstones, Mimikyus, Farigiraf, Milotic EX as well. Yeah, you need to have a bunch of respect to these annoying Pokemon. Your opponent often throws hit point buff tools on there, they throw healing into the mix, so having a surplus of wall breakers can be really important. The other additional cards I added was that 3rd copy of Area Zero. I think 2 is really cheeky to be honest with you, but I have seen some online lists. And then the Countercatcher and the Research come back in. I did quickly want to mention that you can play the Cornerstone without playing the Fighting Energy and still just play the 5 Grass. The only reason that makes me a little bit nervous is that if you are up against some of these walling archetypes, it's still really powerful to use the Crystal for your Wellspring Ogerpon. If you're up against something like Feraligatr, taking out multiple of those basics are really important. Sometimes you can even KO those Feebas and Girafarig before they even evolve, and that lets you charge through your prize race much more effectively. So honestly, I like having a Fighting Energy, not just so that you can prize the Crystal and still get away with it, but it still enables you to use that Crystal on the Torrential Pump, which is still your go-to early prize option. The other 60 I've been testing incorporates that Zarude. I actually think it's very powerful. It seems to do a lot in this format, and it lets you play that clean 5 Grass Energy, which I'm a big fan of. In this instance, rather than adding to a second copy of Professor's Research, I've added in the one copy of Buddy Buddy Poffin. That's because I'm only playing the 5 Terrestrial Pokemon, the Ogapons and the Pikachu, rather than the other couple of lists you've just seen, which have additional Terra Pokemon. So the Buddy Buddy Poffin is trying to be that offset, so I can save my Nest Balls and Ultra Balls for those Terrestrial Pokemon, so that I can still get a turn 2 Jewel Seeker. Also in this instance, I'm playing the 3rd copy of Energy Switch. Again, this is somewhat of a nod to the Zarude because it puts energy back into the hand, so there will be more opportunities to get additional Teal Dance in that can then be energy switched off my board. One final note is that in this list specifically, because I have the Buddy Buddy Poffin inclusion, there are no 80 hit point Hoot Hoot. The 80 hit pointer can come up now and again. It can help you play around a Hawlucha plus Phantom Dive combination from a Dragapult player, and it can be a Pokemon you can promote into opposing Fan Rotom builds, so they can't get an easy Assault Landing single prize KO. Of course, in this instance, it's trumped by being Buddy Buddy Poffin searchable, so we have made that small change. Due to the nature of this toolbox and how flexible it can be by cherry-picking crucial attackers out of the deck, energy out of the deck, and all these other pieces as you go, it doesn't feel right to do a full matchup spread. The long story short is that Ogapon is great for the lower hit point evolving stuff. You have type coverage with Clefairy and Teal Mask into the stage 2 matchups like Charizard and Dragapult. The generic high damage output of Pikachu, Blood Moon Ursaluna, and Lily's Clefairy when you have Area 0 Underdepths all chip in quite nicely as well. So finding the right windows of opportunity for all of these Pokemon is the crucial element of this archetype. However, I will leave you with a few of those general tips and takeaways for this approach. Honestly, this is one of the hardest archetypes I've played in years to play perfectly, and it feels like every time I come away from a game, even ones I win, there's always plays I could have made to be safer from hand disruption, or kept extra lines open. So many things to look back on every single game I play with a deck. Some of my most important takeaways is that prize checking is essential. It's not even a question. You have to not only look at all of your Pokemon attacking options, you have to look at your energy suite, you have to keep track of how many Crispin, how many energy switch you have available, your Noctowls of course, even keeping an eye on your Night Stretch accounts, your boss's orders, pretty much everything. This is definitely like a notepad deck, possibly even more so than Lost Box decks of old. Next up is when your Area 0 gets bounced. Noctowl basically always goes first. The only time you won't do that is if your opponent has pre-damaged things and is setting up KOs across your board. That's when you would consider getting rid of your other multi-prizes. Pretty much always you dump the Noctowls so that you have those Night Stretchers to help you out in the late game whenever you draw into them. Thirdly, prioritize keeping that Hoot Hoot open. There are so many situations where you can Dual Seek and have an incredible turn and really blow the opponent out the water. And obviously, like on turn 2, if you're doing a Wellspring, I would encourage that. But if you don't think your Jewel Seeker is like keeping you in the game or instantly winning you the game, and you can still piece together a decent turn without committing your final Jewel Seeker, it's often going to be better served holding that in hand, saving it for those later stages, so that when you are inevitably hit with hand disruption, you still have easy ways to close the game. Even with Mew EX, even with Pheasantipity on the board, without a Jewel Seeker open, it's still a lot to ask for this deck, because you run so thin on those late game resources that you need to still cherry pick those cards to win the game, rather than hope to draw into them naturally. And then the final tip is not to always spend that Sparkling Crystal. Trying to utilize your Jewel Seekers to weave in those energy switch is really crucial here, because whenever you can save Crystal for the late game for a Pikachu blow-up attack, a late game Wellspring can still close out a number of games, that's still going to be really, really valuable to you. Of course, there'll be a ton of matchups where your map may end with Blood Moon Ursaluna rather than a Terrestrial Pokemon, but by utilizing Crystal straight away rather than finding other workarounds with Jewel Seekers, finding Teal Mask, Ogapon, Energy Switch, and Crispin, you do limit your sort of late game burst potential and lock yourself even more into Crispin lines of play and make it more difficult to find boss's orders combinations. So whenever I've gone down to 2 prize cards without having used that Crystal, I always feel like I'm in a really good position with the deck, knowing that I can always burst into play either that Pikachu or the Wellspring Ogapon from one Crystal Crispin combination, just from one Jewel Seeker later on in the game, because it's very likely that your turn 2 is going to be double Jewel Seeker, but in the mid and late game, it's much more common that you will only have one to utilize. So making your lines of play much more straightforward as you go throughout the game is going to benefit you greatly, and saving the Crystal is just one of the ways you can do that. I hope you enjoyed my discussion on Terabox. I've already done a 4-hour stream with this archetype just the other day. Make sure to check that out if you want to see more gameplay of this deck. If you have any questions that I didn't cover, definitely get them down in the description below. For me, it's definitely the best deck in this format. It's just a case of mastering it. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what your thoughts about the guide, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.